The Soviet-Afghan War began when the Soviet Union invaded neighboring Afghanistan in 1979. Their goal was to support the communist regime that was in place. The Communist Party, the PDPA, had come into power in 1978 after the Saur Revolution. The new leaders pushed through radical reforms much too quickly. Land was taken from large landowners and distributed to workers. Women were encouraged to become educated and to modernize. These initiatives really angered the conservative Muslim leaders, the Mujahideen, especially in the rural areas around the country. As factional violence increased, the Soviet Union was drawn into supporting the PDPA. There were many in the Soviet Politburo who were reluctant to be involved. There were advisors who warned that the Afghans were an extremely independent people and that war may be difficult. However, other Soviet leaders underestimated and believed that it would be a quick operation to help the Afghan communists secure control in the countrysides, and that their involvement could be done in a matter of months. It's always dangerous to predict a short war. The Soviet Union invaded in 1979 and became so entangled that they were not able to withdraw until 1989, almost 10 years of a bloody and expensive campaign, which was essentially the death knell of Soviet communism. Clearly, the Soviet Union made a big mistake in 1979. However, what is not commonly known is the extent of the American role in the Soviet-Afghan War. As early as 1979, 6 months before the Soviet invasion, U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski believed that this was an expansionist operation. He believed that the Soviet Union wanted access to the Indian Ocean and potentially control oil in the Persian Gulf. The official record is that the US response followed the Soviet invasion. However, records show that the CIA had begun covert aid to the Afghan resistance groups fighting the communist government a full 6 months before the Soviet invasion. Even more shocking and revealing is Brzezinski's admission that the U.S. intention in providing this aid was to draw the Russians into the Afghan trap. He believed the secret operation to be an excellent idea, and on the day the Soviets officially crossed the border, he wrote to President Carter, "We now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War." And just as Brzezinski predicted, the Soviet Union became more bogged down as they unsuccessfully used textbook offensives against the Mujahideen guerrilla fighters in the very mountainous and difficult regions throughout Afghanistan. Similar to American soldiers in Vietnam, as this war became more difficult and more soldiers were being killed, the Soviet troops became more brutal against the Afghan people. With guerrilla fighting, you can't always tell who the enemies are, so there were times when entire villages of people were killed. The USSR began aerial bombing of villages. Of course, all of the civilian deaths led to more people joining the Mujahideen, and it became a vicious cycle. One might ask how the factionalized Mujahideen groups were able to fight the mighty Soviet military so successfully. After all, the USSR had invested a huge amount of money in their military for decades, even at the expense of developing their economy. I guess the key thing to remember here is that, similar to many conflicts during the Cold War, this was essentially a proxy war. The US, beginning with the Carter administration and intensified by Reagan covertly supported the Mujahideen to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. To make matters worse, the money was funneled through the leader of Pakistan, a questionable character by the name of General Zia, and someone they can control. The former director of the CIA Afghan task force pointed out that, quote, while we were providing the means to wage this war, they were waging it. It is entirely true that this is a war fought with our gold and their blood. Also, according to a more moderate Mujahideen leader at the time, he indicated that the Pakistanis had their own agenda and that they were giving most of the money and arms to the hardliner groups. By cooperating with the US, Pakistan was able to eventually acquire their own nuclear program as the CIA turned a blind eye to their efforts. The US ended up supporting 7 different Mujahideen groups, with the most radical ones receiving the bulk of the money. The problem with weaponizing the most extremist groups is that they would eventually emerge as the Taliban in the 1990s. In fact, this defeat of the Soviet superpower in Afghanistan was the inspiration for 9/11, which Osama bin Laden organized from a sanctuary the Taliban gave al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. 3 American administrations had invested in war making, but never bothered to invest in war termination. Within a year of intervening, Moscow began desperately seeking an exit. In 1982, negotiations in the United Nations began, but as long as the Soviets were continuing to bleed, the Reagan administration undermined peace negotiations and continued to pour more covert dollars into the war. In 1986, with more than 25,000 soldiers dead, Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev called Afghanistan a bleeding wound and said he wanted Soviet troops out. More negotiations continued, and it was another 3 years before they were finally able to pull out in 1989. This was one of the most damaging periods in recent Afghan history when the West and Pakistan, along with the Mujahideen, undermined the best chance of ending the country's civil war. In terms of the American role, in spite of claiming a moral high ground, the results after a decade of war were 1 million dead, 6 million refugees, economic ruin, and political shambles. If you've ever seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War, there is a scene near the end where Tom Hanks is warned by the CIA operative that they need to get money to help rebuild Afghanistan or the crazies would come.
But the era of Soviet military intervention in other countries is now over.
Well, I've told you.
Told me what?
All we had to do, shoot down the helicopters.
Listen, not for nothing, but do you know the story about the Zen master and the little boy?
Oh, is this something from Nitsa, the Greek witch of Aquilippa, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. There was a little boy, and on his 14th birthday, he gets a horse. And everybody in the village says, how wonderful, the boy got a horse. And the Zen master says, we'll see. 2 years later, the boy falls off the horse, breaks his leg, and everybody in the village says, how terrible. And the Zen master says, we'll see. Then a war breaks out, and all the young men have to go off and fight, except the boy can't because his leg's all messed up. And everybody in the village says, how wonderful.
And the Zen master says, we'll see.
So you get it.
No, because I'm stupid.
You're not stupid. You're just in Congress.
Send them money.
You can start with the roads, move on to the schools, factories.
Gus, now it's a party.
Restock the sheep herds, give them jobs, give them hope.
I'm trying.
Yeah, well, try harder.
I'm fighting for every dollar.
Yeah.
I took you from 5 million to $1 billion. I broke the ice on the sting in the Milan. I got a Democratic Congress in lockstep behind a Republican president.
Well, that's not good enough, because I'm going to hand you a code word classified NIE right now, and it's going to tell you that the crazies have started rolling into Kandahar like it's a fucking bathtub drain.
Jesus, Gus, you could depress a bride on her wedding day.
Hey. Listen to what I'm telling you.
You did a hell of a job for the son of a soda pop maker.
We'll see. Said the Zen master.
Considering all of the problems with extremism and instability in the Middle East today, these were definitely mistakes that changed the world. The conflict solidified the concept of global jihad, provided a platform for the emergence of Al-Qaeda, and precipitated the rise of the Taliban regime. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the information informative. Please give us a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.